Show on this Monday. And we welcome you in from the Twitterverse. We've mostly shown this exclusively on YouTube, and of course it will be, but we are trying out something new because of the following we have on Twitter. And you can subscribe to this show, the RDL Show on YouTube. Listen via the podcast on the Believe Podcast Network. Follow us here on Twitter and Instagram at the RDL Show, and subscribe again to the RDL Show on YouTube. Welcome. It is Monday. The playoffs tried something a little bit different this year in a lot of different ends, right? The NFL added a team. The NBA had a similar play-in situation put into the playoffs. And it made me start to think about expansion. We'll welcome in Sky Guasco and Jonathan Rifkin here a little bit to discuss. And I think this is an interesting topic simply because of what it looks like in terms of fan reception now. I would look at it from two different perspectives. One, for me, for somebody who doesn't follow the NBA incredibly closely all year long until the playoffs, I was fascinated. I thought and listened to and paid more attention to the end of the season because of this expansion. During other regular seasons, I simply just waited till the standings were done because I didn't feel like down the stretch they came made that much of a difference, because when you throw in the last four teams in the concept, it made it more interesting to me. Now, that's from somebody, again, who clearly is telling you doesn't watch it as closely as others. I'm going to ask Jonathan in here to talk about it from a different aspect of things here in a few minutes. But it made me think about the expansion everywhere. And I revolved mostly around the college football realm. It's where I did my work for ESPN. It's what I do on SiriusXM most of the time. That leads to the NFL talk. But college football in general has been the discussion around expansion for I don't know how long, right? It was the two teams that were considered the top teams played for the national championship was never the case until the BCS came along. And when that came along, it was two teams and it was computer generated and it was an algorithm and all these things until the college football playoff expanded it to four teams and everybody was so excited about that. And now we're in a place, and last year I thought was one that exemplified it mightily, that there needed to be a shift. And I would think for the longest time, I was a guy that sat around and thought about it as a non-starter, right? This is an elite and exclusive club where there were four teams that got the opportunity, and because of the Power 5 conferences, somebody was going to be left out. But this last year, with the difference in context, mute both you guys for a minute so I can talk here, fellas. And the context of what that looks like, right? This past year, we simply saw teams that I didn't think deserved to be in the conversation because of not all things being equal. Normally, things are mostly equal, right? You play some non-conference games, you play a conference schedule. It never has been equivalent, right? The ACC and the SEC played 8 games, where the Big Ten and the Pac-12 played 9 games, as well as the Big 12 in all of this, right? So there was never necessarily equal. Last year, they played only conference only, so they played some more games, so it was probably as equal as it came. And then the two conferences that played as many as normal, they were limited to about 6 or less games. So I found it really difficult, and this would have been the year for the committee to really expand and say, hey, let's throw in 16 this year and let it roll. Now, the health and wellness of the players was a deciding factor, of course, because now you're going to take the season longer when you want to get it over with and crown a national champion. So I also could get it from that standpoint. I think the college football platform is right for the expansion side of it. What we saw with the NBA, moving it to 10 teams, made it more exciting for those who don't maybe pay as much attention to it. And I'm one of those. I'm one of those fans, right? I'm one of those fans that doesn't necessarily pay as much attention until it gets to the end of the year. But I was fascinated, especially with the Lakers being in the conversation. and because of what the Golden State Warriors have been able to do to put themselves in that position without without arguably their best, one of their best players in Klay Thompson for the last 2 years, but what Steph Curry has been able to do this season to carry this team to get into a place and easily could step into the playoffs with a 1 win over the Lakers, I think, tomorrow night. So the expansion side of it, right? Pro football's added another team. Last year, that allowed the Washington football team. No, that allowed the Chicago Bears to get in. They didn't fare very well against the New Orleans Saints in the first round of the playoffs. Can you mute those guys? It's just incredibly loud in my ear. And then on the other side of the AFC, the seventh team that gets in really presented the Ravens and the Cleveland Browns, 3 teams from a division. So I think more where I thought would be diluting something was less than, it's actually added to it. And when this is done, I think it makes for a better one. I'm gonna welcome in Jonathan and Sky now to talk about this. Jonathan and I had an incredible conversation pre-show because he was the only voice I had heard, a dissenting voice, in that he felt the playing games had diluted and made it less interesting because the teams at the top stopped playing and being competitive down the stretch because they already knew what was going to shape up.
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, I don't know if this is a playoff expansion, Ryan. Our playing games, they're not considered postseason games. This is to get into the postseason. This is
expansion. This is something that's expanding to what it was anytime previously.
It's the first 4 of the NCAA tournament. That's what it is,
Yeah.
And as a guy who watches basketball whenever it's on, I put it on when I'm doing prep in the background. Sometimes I put it on when I'm calling a game if it's boring and I need something else. Like this is my sport. And when when it's the late season push and I'm watching Philadelphia take on New York, and both teams are pretty set and still not playing in the play-in tournament, and Embiid's sitting and Ben Simmons is sitting, and for New York, Emmanuel Quickley's sitting and Julius Randle's playing limited minutes. The quality of the content decreases, and it's like, okay, I know it's going to be better for these teams in the postseason, but the problem is that if the quality is going to suck for the next 4 or 5 weeks because we have still ways to go to get to that point. This makes it less interesting for me. Are the storylines fun? Yes. Steph Curry blasting off into the stratosphere and leading the Warriors on an 8-2 run over the last 10 games to get into that 7th spot is a phenomenal story. The Lakers and the Trailblazers duking it out. The Trailblazers had to go. This guy put his house on the line and tweeted at Dame Lillard. I don't know if you saw this. Like 2 months ago and said, if you guys don't make the postseason, not the play-in, but the postseason, I will literally lose my house, but I'm a fan no matter what. And Dame said, say less, and they went and they won 15 over the last 20 games, and they're the 6th seed, right? Like the grind that some of these bottom seeded teams made was inspirational. It was fun to watch, but none of these teams are going to win a championship. None of these teams are probably going to be in the Western Conference Final. So why are we putting ourselves through it? Why are we?
The Lakers don't have a chance.
The Lakers are a rare exception because Ryan, I'm telling you this: if there were no playing games, if they knew that they were locked into a playoff spot, they would have brought LeBron and AD back earlier. We would have seen them back earlier. The reason that they sat these guys is because they knew no matter what, they were like, if we drop to the play-in tournament, at least LeBron and AD are going to be fully healthy where we can beat the Warriors, we can beat the Grizzlies and get back into the playoffs. But I think that if they were fighting for just a natural playoff spot, we would have seen AD and LeBron come back earlier, and we would have seen them try harder. That's just
why do you think you would have seen them come back early when they were guaranteed a spot? Now they're not guaranteed a spot.
Correct, but the health of LeBron and AD in a play-in game is far more important than in game 1 and 2 of a 7-game series in the opening round, right? Because this is why I say it's not an expansion. You're still fighting for a playoff spot. You just said it's not guaranteed, right? And so they needed AD and LeBron to be rested, because if you don't have AD and LeBron, you're not beating the Warriors. You're not. You
But
made up
my
the
question to you is why would they have played at all
because
if they were guaranteed the seventh spot?
Because they would have been fighting for a higher. They would have been in the contention for a high. They were in the fourth seed when these guys went out, and within 3 games, they dropped, and they realized it's way more important if we're playing more games. Because even imagine if LeBron and AD came back and they were still a playing team, just hypothetically. Team's not well rested, and then they're having their 2 stars are there was a 70-day offseason this year, Ryan. Like, they have worn and torn stars and a bunch of support guys who can't really carry the load when they need to. That's not sufficient enough to win multiple playing games, not sufficient enough to win a 7-game series, not sufficient enough to win an NBA championship. And so they would.
I'm just confused
sure.
of why they would even play because they were guaranteed a spot.
Because you need to fight for a higher at the beginning of the higher seed.
Why did they fight for a high? They came back early. They came back early and didn't fight for a higher seed. Wouldn't they wanted to fight for a higher seed than rather play a play-in game? Because a play-in game means they could be out with one game.
I truly think they conceded. I don't think I don't think that anybody anticipated Portland making this run. I don't. I like Sky. You're in Pacific Northwest country. I don't know, but all of my Portland friends, nobody anticipated Portland doing what they just did in the last 2 weeks. Nobody. And so Lakers, maybe they were content. Maybe like, okay, Portland's not going to go and win 15 of the last 20. We're going to be in the 6th seed. Like, there's a lot of other variables that are out of their control that play into the perception of decisions that need to be made. And so, I just don't think that, I think that having a 1 through 8 or a 1 through 10 and giving a bye is fine. Like, that's real expansion, going 1 through 10 and not having play. Like, make it a best of 3 in the first round and give a bye to the first X seed, like X amount of seeds. But I don't know if having a tournament, like, it really is.
Well, I guarantee you, right? I think maybe you're so close to this. This has invigorated a ton of on the spectrum viewers of the NBA. I really do believe. I think you're going to have some pretty good ratings for this Golden State Los Angeles Lakers playing game.
And that's what I told you in the pregame meeting, Ryan. I think that this is the reason that this kept going. It made sense in the bubble. It made sense because the way that the season went, it got cut off. We needed to have some sort of way to evaluate the teams and where they were. It made total sense. The NBA made a crap ton of money selling Michelob Ultra the rights, selling State Farm the rights, getting on. And now that there are fans in stadiums, they can get on-site partners. They can, like, all of a sudden now, here is an extra source of revenue. Here is an asset.
Well, I mean, hey, it's great business. It's great business. But I also as a fair-weather fan of the NBA, I'm more interested in it because of this play-in stuff than I would have been at all.
But so that's the thing, right? It all comes back to money because the NBA was the highest rated sport.
Well, it doesn't come back to money to me.
It does.
I'm more interested.
Not to you. Correct, because you're playing into the perception that they're painting.
Well, so is everybody else who's going to watch these games next
Absolutely, and this is my frustrations, Ryan. Because
what is your frustration?
Because the
I don't get why you think it's a bad thing.
No, it's not a bad thing, and by no way is this a bad, like, it's not a bad thing. As someone who watches and appreciates the analytics and the play and the competitive, like, I love the storylines. It's hard for me to get stuck on Steph Curry as MVP. Like, recency bias is a huge thing, right? Having LeBron come out and say, "Oh, Steph Curry's MVP," having John Morant come out and say Steph Curry's MVP. No, Nikola Jokic is your MVP, right? Like, fair weather fans now all of a sudden get up in a tizzy because LeBron James is saying Steph Curry should be MVP. So we're going to go look at the stats and be like, oh, no, he's MVP. No, he's not. Jokic is more valuable to this team and he's a higher seed, right? So, like, there's the fair weather fan perception, which is recency bias, a lot of giving into the, like what we said with the draft, right? It's not a facade, but it really is. And I'm not saying that, like, these. I
think you're making this too complicated.
But because it is. The NBA wants you to watch the games.
It's not that complicated. They've added playing games and people are more excited about it.
They didn't have a problem with viewership before. The reason that they want more viewers
I wasn't watching it.
Right. And so now you're an extra eyeball for them to go and sell.
That's fine. That's fine that the extra eyeball to go and sell. But for the fan, it's more enjoyable. It's more competitive. We were more interested in the last few weeks of the season than I've been in 20 years.
Ryan, also it screws up the draft, the way that the draft is, like, the seedings for the draft, and we can get into that.
Oh,
later.
it's just
I
so much.
I promise you that we will not. Within 2 years, the play-in tournament will be gone. It will be out. The NBA Players Association will find a way to cancel this thing. They do not like it
Why don't they like it?
because of the Ryan.
Why doesn't the NBAPA like it?
Because it's an exploit. I explained this to you in the pre-show meeting. It's an exploitation of, I don't even know, like talent, I guess. They're getting paid millions of dollars, so it's really not. But when LeBron James and Anthony Davis have to play 2 extra games to get into the playoffs, and they have to play a 7-game series in the first round against a team who has rested Donovan Mitchell, Michael Conley, Rudy Gobert, Joe Ingles, Bogey, Jordan Clarkson. They've rested their core, their entire team for weeks. And you're asking teams now to play extra games so they can be extra tired and be less competitive when it comes to the actual meat of the postseason. And players don't want to have to do that. They don't want to have to do that when they have a short off season. They don't want to have to do that when they don't have they're. And by the way, they're not the media.
But they played 10 less games too.
But they didn't want it, Ryan. They had a 70-day off season.
I get that, but they played 10 less games too.
Yeah, but if you go look at the schedule, they were playing 4 games in 5 nights. Right? Like, that doesn't make it less intense. This has been one of the more mentally drained, with having to deal with protocols, not being able to practice, not being able to go out and have an individual identity extracted from basketball, right? Because that's what makes you a human being. Like, this is what the circumstances provided, and it's mentally draining, man. We saw it in college football. It meant the season mentally drained these athletes, and I guarantee you at the professional level, we're seeing, at least in the NBA, maybe not in the NFL, but it really feels like in the NBA, like, LeBron even said, I'm not going to be right maybe for the rest of my career. I think he's saying that because he's not going to be right for the rest of the season, and it's to set our expectations. But that's sort of the point, is like, just because they play 10 fewer, like, just too many circumstances for the 10 fewer games to really be that big of a difference.
Okay, but we don't care about the players.
I care about the players.
No, you watch basketball.
Okay, but the reason I watch basketball is because I love the play. Like, I watch basketball for the players.
Right, they're playing.
That's how sports work. You were a player. I'm confused. You
don't like it, but the fan base likes this.
Have you talked to how do you know?
There's been an incredible response from people around the fact that they love this in terms of having
do you think that you've been surrounded by confirmation bias a little bit? Because I've heard a lot of, like you told me, I'm the first person like
you're the first person I've heard.
All right, I'll send you plenty of stuff after the show. Then this is not an.
You only mentioned one person's name. You said Ryan Russillo is the only person you mentioned.
Okay, but he was a placeholder. I'll send you if you would like to get more informed on the other side of this. I'm happy to send you stuff.
How come I haven't seen it?
I don't know.
I look at you and I follow the same things.
I don't know what to tell you, Ryan. I listen
Sky, you're interestingly quiet on this. What's your? Did you enjoy the fact that there was a build up to the end of the run here where they're playing games?
As a Warriors fan, I did, because it's been exciting for us. I think I look at the standings here though, and I look at the Knicks in the East that are the 4 seed. They have 41 wins. I look in the 7 seed with the Lakers. They have 42 wins. So I think the West is just so much more dominant anyway.
That's always been the case, though.
As far as this, we get Charlotte, Indiana, San Antonio, and Memphis wouldn't even be discussed right now if we didn't have this plan. So those 4 fan bases are excited. That is a whole other fan base expansion, if you will, for the NBA. I don't think any of those teams have a chance to even get through this round to play on. We just talked pre-show that no matter who wins or loses, I should say, the Lakers or the Warriors play-in game, the winner moves on. The loser has to play.
How many times has the 8 seed beat the 1? Twice?
Once. Yeah, well, twice. I remember once with the Warriors and the Mavericks, but it's I like
the Nuggets. The Nuggets beat the Supersonics.
I like it as a general fan of basketball. I like it. More teams are playing. I understand where Jonathan's coming from. I understand where the players are coming from.
Whoever came up with the play-in tournament should get fired. Did you not see that trend on social media, Ryan?
I have a really hard time taking anything that LeBron says too seriously.
He's a player, though. But he's a player.
I have a really hard time with him right now. There's a lot of I have a really hard time taking anything he has to say seriously right now. I think it's manufactured. I think it's a ton of stuff that isn't
You
what the
think
other
Rich
players
Paul is just
believe.
whispering into his ears so that and pulling the strings?
No, I think it's always. I've always felt it was the other way around.
I think LeBron's pulling the strings.
Yeah. I think he has a very good handle on everything that's going on in the NBA and has had a very good handle on how to control it with placing people in powerful positions and in powerful positions.
I don't think I'm going to convince you otherwise. I'm not going to be convinced.
Yeah, because I'm coming from my
I'm still
point
going to
of view.
watch it. I'm still going to watch it, and I'm going to enjoy
I'm
it.
not. I won't. But I was more interested because
So
I
then
was
you're
more
not an
interested because
eyeball.
I had never even paid attention to the NBA in the final 2 weeks of the season.
So then it
Ever.
gives you the credibility to stand here and argue with me.
That's a huge. That's the person that's viewed in the last 2 weeks that's made it a higher ratings bonanza for them.
But it's more than that's. Okay, I'm gonna get too frustrated.
It's more than what?
Let's move. It's not. That's my point. Is like you can't just take. This is the recency bias. How you're playing into the narrative of the story. There's way more than just what's happened in the last 2 weeks in the NBA. There is, and it all culminates at this point, and it totally undervalues all of those moments if all fans are caring about is the last 2 weeks. And it sucks. And I hate
no one cares. No one cared about the regular season beforehand. Now they actually do care about the end of the season.
When somebody sits here and tells me they don't watch the NBA and they want to argue with me about it, it's hard for me to sit here and be like, "Oh, okay, yeah, you're right. I watch."
No one cares about the regular season, Jonathan.
That's not true. That's
no one does.
Not true.
That's why Jokic's not going to win the MVP.
All right. Let's just move on. What's next on the docket?
That's our next on the list. Steph is the MVP. Is the next thing on our list.
Sky, got to change the rundown here. I'm going to jump in here and I'm going to agree with Ryan on that point that he just made. I personally, I'm a sports nerd all across the board. I do appreciate the regular season. Ryan got into this a couple shows ago, Jonathan, when you were off about the baseball regular season, that it just doesn't matter to the general fan, which is true, but baseball nuts are about it all season long. I think it is important because of what Steph Curry has done the last month, 2 months of the season versus even a Chris Paul and Jokic, who's been basically leading the MVP race most of the season. But because of what Steph has done in the last bit of the season, if the NBA players have a vote, it's going to be Steph. You've heard multiple of the biggest names in the sport come out and say it's Steph,
more
including LeBron.
And who votes on the MVP?
Media and coaches.
Yeah, right.
Media and coaches?
Okay. Media and coaches.
But again, I think, the difference is, Steph has the track record as well. I think it's hard to get away from that.
Steph is going to finish third. As of right now, Jokic has the best odds and Embiid in second.
He's had the best odds forever. We've talked about on the show.
And the
5
odds
times.
just go up. Why do the odds keep going up every week, Sky? Even though these players are
he's more of a favorite, I'm sure. But
okay, but why are his odds going up? Because he's asserting himself as the front runner each week in that conversation. That's why his odds are coming up. And people are betting on those odds because they think that Jokic is probably going to win the MVP. So yes, are there stars coming out and saying Steph deservedly has had the biggest impact on his team from like a scoring standpoint. Jokic is a triple-double machine and has done more with less to get to the 4th seed than what Stephen Curry has done to get to the 7th seed. It's just like that. And we can go to the analytics, we can go to DVOAs, we can go to offensive, usage rates. And Jokic is has the same usage rate as Curry and has better numbers across the board. But as a fan, Curry's more exciting. But being more exciting isn't going to get you MVP, and that's why he's not going to win it. And that sucks, but that's the reality of the situation.
Steph Curry's going to be the MVP. Moving on. All right. Any upsets in this year's conference? We talked about Utah at 1. Here's the West for you. Utah at 1, Phoenix at 2, Denver at 3. Clippers at 4, Dallas at 5, Portland at 6, and of course 7th and 8th seeds will be decided over the next couple nights. Is there a team down the stretch? I mean, clearly, I guess the Lakers are the team. If Golden State were to beat the Lakers, is that a team over a 7-game series of Steph Curry over 7 games? Is that a team that actually could make a run into the playoffs, or is there it's just not enough?
No,
I do think so. And it's Steph number one, but it's also playoff experience. And it's Steve Kerr as head coach. That matters when you get to the postseason. A lot of these other teams are very raw as far as playoff experience currently. Portland has been there a number of times. I believe they have the longest streak in the West. But Dallas, Phoenix as well, outside of Chris Paul. If the Lakers or the Warriors, whoever gets into that second round, if they can get through the first round, I think both those teams have a legit shot. And Portland's been playing really well lately.
This may be the biggest like testament to that the regular season doesn't mean shit. Is that the top three seeds in the West, in your guys' opinion, don't even have a shot at winning the title?
No. The question in the conversation was who are maybe some upset teams. So
I get it.
The Warriors could win the first round. They're
okay. Not even about the Warriors, but this. I just looking at this: Utah, Phoenix, and Denver. You guys, none of you believe that that they're going to win a title.
Legitimately.
Long term, I don't.
Legitimately,
what do you mean long term? We're here.
No, I know. I'm saying throughout the duration of the playoffs, I don't think that they're
the top three seeds in the West. So what does the regular season mean? If when you get into the top three seeds, what the hell does it matter? Just as long as you get in.
But the thing is, Ryan, is that there's a lot of like when we extract, like take the seeds away, right? Like to win a 7-game series, you need a bench. You need to have players that consistently can come and perform for you. How do you like? The reason I don't think Brooklyn's going to win the championship is because they played 6 games together with the big three. And like, yeah, you're talented, but how do you build cohesion? How do you build chemistry? How do you build a game plan if you're just going to go and street ball it in a 7-game series against teams who have been working together for 72 plus games at that point? And so when I look at a team like Denver, right, really well coached, they have their identity. I think they can make a run at the Western Conference Final. I don't think they could beat a fully healthy Lakers. I don't think they could beat a fully healthy Clippers. I think Phoenix is in the same situation. Utah is honestly the best perimeter defense in the Western Conference. And if they could find a way, into the Western Conference Championship, and if they're playing the Lakers or the Clippers, I think of those 3 teams, they have the best chance if they remain fully healthy to actually represent the West in the championship. But other than that, it is a good point. But you have to cultivate more than just a high seed. Like you have to be able to get yourself into a position conditioning wise to compete in a 7-game series. And that's really hard to do.
So it doesn't matter. You just get in. As long as just get in. Just get in. Cultivate your team just the right way as long as you get in. So the Lakers, probably if they are able to sneak in with the play-in, may have done it as right as anybody. Rested their stars for most of the year.
The Lakers aren't going to win the Western Conference, though. I put money on that right now. They don't have the bench. They just don't. Like, Anthony Davis and LeBron, one of those 2 guys is going to be left alone, and it's going to be on purpose. They're going to let them get their own. And we see it with Steph when they go and triple team Steph. As long as Steph can get his own, but if you go and you stop everybody else, you can beat that team. And that's why the Warriors are going to have a tough chance in a 7-game series against any of these teams in the top 6, top 7, because if they go and they triple team Steph, or even if they just defend everybody else and let Steph get 50 points, like you have to score 120 points in some of these games to win, and they're not going to be able to do that. And so,
to score 120 points a game, you probably need to be in pretty good shape, and to do that, you probably need to start eating right. And if that's the case, you need to go to sunfair.com right now, get your personalized, delivered healthy meals right to your door. Once you get to the website, enter your information, you'll look like that in a matter of 6 months. That was me July 3rd, 2020. Those 2 are from a couple Sundays ago. Click on sales representative Carl Farrell, and then click on the Ryan D. Lee Show about where you heard it. You'll get 10% off your first delivery to your door if you live in the LA and Phoenix area. Sunfair.com once again. All right. We got buried in NBA talk. I didn't realize that was actually possible in this brain of mine, but we did. Next up.
When you sit here and disagree, it's possible.
Or, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. All right. So, it's that buzzing again. I don't know where that's coming from. Next up, our friend of the show, Cynthia Freeland, is going to join us and we talked about the schedules released last week. Cynthia has a really interesting model algorithm that terms with the analytics on what teams actually have a more advantageous chance at getting to the playoffs because of the scheduling, and I'm sure she's added in how they drafted as well. And then I'd be interested to see what they are doing and who she left off these lists that I think a lot of people would just assume that are in it. Jonathan, let me know when we get her, and she'll be here she is. She'll be the third time she's joined the show here.
Hello.
How are you, miss?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing really good. We
Happy
got. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm an old man.
Man.
45. That's kind of getting up there. It's kind of
No.
getting up there. I feel like I'm 65. Let's put it that way. So that must be good. We got off track talking about the NBA, and Jonathan trying to tell me all these things about something I don't watch, which is probably why I don't watch it. You watched the schedule release come out last Thursday. You have a very interesting viewpoint of it with your model in terms of win percentage and things like that. I was interested to see some of the teams that you left off. And talk to us a little bit about the model and how you went about kind of deciding the win probability of these teams this season.
Well, first off, we already knew who everyone was playing. We just didn't know the order. And you can probably speak to this better than most people, but it is interesting. Like if a team's preparing for one style of quarterback and then they go directly to another style of quarterback, like imagine that the Bengals have to face Lamar Jackson one week and then the very next week, Tom Brady, which sucks. Like that's terrible. So it's hard to go completely different styles, right? So the Lamar Jackson defensive game plan is going to be considerably different than the Tom Brady or the, Patrick Mahomes game plan, right? So when you're looking to see what goes on back and forth and how much travel, like, there's a couple of teams that like the Dolphins don't have to travel for like a month, which is great. And then the Bucks actually, they don't have to like go, they only have one trip west. It's early in the season and it's kind of like a nice just one to LA and back, which is far, but not really far. It's not like Seattle, which is even further. So, it's kind of factoring in the sequence of all of these games played because it does actually take a toll. When is your bye? Especially with an added game. If you have a lot of rookies on your team, you can imagine this year, those rookies, they didn't even play a full season last year, but they've never played that many games in a row before. So there is a rookie wall no matter what. So it's the sequence.
Those variables, the things that as players we think about too when we see that schedule come out, what immediately I looked at was when our bye week was, because that was always like if the bye week is in week 4, I'm just like, shit, we got to play 12, 13 consecutive weeks. But also as a San Diego Charger at the time, I looked at how many times I had to go to the East Coast, the 3 hours difference, and going that way in terms of the East Coast teams coming out west and gaining those hours. Talk to us about that as a variable and having to travel if you are a LA Rams or you are LA Chargers or a 49ers or in particular the Seahawks, which seemingly has to go around the country a lot.
Yeah, I mean, what you see is those early games, you see like a slower. Now, I will say teams have gotten smarter and they have, adjusted. They've traveled earlier, so more days. Or if they have back-to-back, East Coast trips or West Coast trips, they typically stay in one place. But the interesting part, it's, they've done a lot to counteract that, so you don't see it bear out like on averages, but specific teams, like you can see which teams don't travel out, like the ones who come Friday, late for a Sunday game. You do see like they'll start often quite slow, especially depending, like if they had a really hard game the week before. And then even if they're traveling, like in the past, the Jaguars haven't been a good team, but you've seen a slower start to teams who've had, like, let's say the Rams played the Seahawks, one week, and then the next week they were out playing the Jags. You'd see a much slower start to the Rams and you see it kind of overall, but it just depends when they travel. So different strokes for different folks, but it's you do notice it and it does have an appreciable difference.
All right, talk to us about the difference in this probability when you're deciding between a rookie quarterback, newly drafted, or a possible veteran. Think of Chicago, and you got Fields and Dalton, and in San Francisco you got Jimmy and Trey Lance. You know, those. How does that variable, how does that model look like when you're making those comparisons?
Well, Justin Fields is a little bit easier because he played more games in college. And obviously, there's a different sort of style. So, the different style between him and Andy Dalton, in recent years, we've seen Andy Dalton kind of be the king of the quick pass. He's been efficient with it and effective. So, there's nothing wrong with Andy Dalton, but he's become a quick passer. That's what we've seen. And then when you go with Justin Fields, he uses his legs more, which you can take quarterbacks that were of a similar type to Justin Fields, and you can kind of see what they did in their first few games. The interesting part about Trey Lance is that, number one, he played very few games. 17 starts is just like zero data. So what happens is it's like a stock. It's like you're buying a crypto stock versus buying, a stock that we know more about, like an Apple stock, right? It could go gangbusters and be awesome, but it could tank as well because we don't have a lot of data on him and we don't know how he's going to adjust. What we can do is we can say, these are the types of things that Kyle Shanahan likes to do. This is what we've seen in the past. These are the other people on the team, the personnel that's involved in it. And you can create kind of a best guess, but the range of outcomes, it's much bigger for a Trey Lance who we have no idea. His level of competition wasn't anywhere, it wasn't Big Ten competition, so it wasn't SEC. You don't have that kind of data about how he fares against really good teams. And sure, we've seen him, he had like 49 forced missed tackles, meaning he's good with his legs, but being good with your legs against
FCS opponents. Yeah.
You're right. Compared to Aaron Donald is like, slightly different.
Yeah, it's a little bit different. You and I talked about this a lot, and I thought it was going to kind of come into play a few years ago when I started talking about it. These rookie deals for quarterbacks, right? You go out and you find one in the draft now that the rookie salary cap exists, and you don't really, mortgage your franchise now when you take a rookie quarterback high in the first round. You're able to miss, but if you do find one, a la Jared Goff, where you connect him with a coach like Sean McVay, you get to a Super Bowl with him, you get that fifth-year option, and then you say, hey, either we have to extend him, which is a huge undertaking, a lot of money versus cap, or you go back and try to do it in the draft once again. I thought we were going to start to see more of that. They decide to extend Jared Goff. He gets shipped out of town almost immediately a couple years later, and I think we're looking in the face at a couple quarterbacks right now that are going to make a determining factor on whether teams are going to do this or not. One, Baker Mayfield in Cleveland. He just was picked up on his fifth-year option. And Sam Darnold was traded, but his option was picked up by Carolina. Those are two guys I think that could be a bit of a litmus test for these teams if we don't see an extension done pretty close, that they may play him through their fifth year and say, hey, we're going to go about what we need to go about and try to find an upgrade in the draft once again.
It's interesting because it's like the devil you know versus the devil you don't. And
right.
Both of those franchises, that the only like asterisks I would put there is both of those franchises, they're both on second-year head coaches, new head coaches. Baker Mayfield had, like 4 different people calling offenses for him. So
I know that. I know what that's like. So yeah.
You've heard something about that, right? I mean, somewhere.
Yeah. I had three offensive coordinators in my first 2 years. So yeah.
Yeah, that's makes it difficult. So I think, and then with the Sam Darnold situation, I think what happened there was that Carolina, they did the math, and that for them, they said, okay, we're going to pay, 21 million, so 750 and about 20 million. Let's just use 21 million. So, 10 and a half per year for Sam Darnold, kind of to eyeball it, which is back money. Ryan Fitzpatrick signed for 10. So they're like, okay, that's our base level. If we can extend him and he's great. It's all upside. If not, we're not going to find a $10 million quarterback that we can at least try to work with on this level. So you know what? That's what we're going to do. That's the roll of the dice we're going to do. And then with the Baker Mayfield, I think the thing is they had so many different people creating so many different types of offenses for him. And now this team is really stacked. If Baker Mayfield can't play well with this particular team, it's not like Sam Darnold. Sam Darnold has a really good offense to work with, but they're young on defense. They got they don't know I'm not going to say they don't know what they're doing, but we don't know what they're going to look like. We don't know how this is going to fare. But with the Cleveland Browns, we kind of know what we're looking at. Like, they built that O-line for him. They have a great run game. They have awesome weapons to catch the passes, and they have a great defense. So if Baker Mayfield doesn't perform, then, that's on Baker, not on anyone else.
We're talking with Cynthia Freeland from the NFL Network, analytics expert. You can check her out at @CFreeland on Twitter. I want to bring in Sky. He had a couple really interesting questions, more around the teams that you left out. Sky, fire away, big fella.
Hey, Cynthia, great to have you back. Thanks for joining once again. I wanted to
that Oregon hat. I love it.
Go Ducks, baby. I got Herbert behind me as well.
I know. I see that. I don't get to see the duck very often. I don't know. It just made me I was like, oh, the duck. Very excited.
Right on. We have two ducks on the program, but Ryan doesn't like to talk about it, so I'll skip over that. So I have 4 teams here I want to talk about just quickly with you, 2 from each conference, and these 4 teams were not listed in your playoff projections, 3 of which made the playoffs last year. So I'm just curious where they fell off a little bit. We'll start with the NFC. Rams and the Seahawks, both out of the NFC West. What kicks them out of the playoffs this year?
So first off, I have to say, everything changes if number 12 does not play for the Packers. The whole thing changes.
Falls apart, yeah.
Falls apart. So let's just that's the asterisk I have to put on all of it. So when it comes to the Rams and the Seahawks, all right. So here's where things are interesting. When I look at the Rams and I look at what they lost this season in free agency, I know they got Matthew Stafford, who is an upgrade. I think he's a great quarterback. I'm not really sure what's going on with their O-line. That's a really big factor. And yes, their defense has 2 really clutch pieces, but they lost a lot of the other things. Like, it's really easier. It's a much easier situation for a quarterback if you don't have Jalen Ramsey plus John Johnson. Getting rid of some of the other players. Of course, you have 2 marquee players, and that's awesome, but they lost a lot. And I don't know if I think that the Matthew Stafford upgrade counts for enough of the difference between the potential to be able to pass on the defense. They lost a lot. I mean, they've got Aaron Donald. I get it. To me, he's the best player in football. So I understand. And they have Jalen Ramsey, but that other side of that defense is dicey. And then for the Seahawks did not impress me in free agency. They did not impress me in the draft. They've lost players. Like, I'm not even sure when I look at their roster, I'm not even sure who's starting or what's going on. I mean, yes, Russell Wilson is, it doesn't get better. Russell Wilson's awesome. But if Russell Wilson is getting pressured and sacked all the time, and he talked about it, even if they change it to be a more run heavy type of offense, that doesn't help them because the back end of their defense is not so great. And the Cardinals got better, and the Niners really banged up. And if they're healthy, they got better just by virtue of getting their own players back. So those 2 things are difficult, and their schedules aren't favorable. Again, unless Aaron Rodgers leaves, then things get better for all of them.
On the AFC, how about the Steelers and the Patriots? I think a lot of the same things for the Steelers is what I'm hearing you talk about. But how about the Steelers and Patriots?
So I will say the Patriots are let's start with the Patriots, like this much of a margin, like teeny weeny margin. And really it comes down to what goes on at the quarterback position that really just makes them just a tiny bit under everyone else in the AFC. So they could easily, by the time camp starts, when the 53-man roster is set, it wouldn't surprise me if the Patriots somehow sneak their way back up into the projected playoff teams. I mean, it doesn't surprise me at all, but we don't really know what we're looking at yet. And if you get good Cam, then good Cam would be great to start off the season. I don't know if I'm buying into Mac Jones right away. He's good, but I don't know. They didn't even have to trade up to get him though. So that seems like a crazy steal. But then when it comes to the Steelers, there's a lot of, I don't like their O-line that much. It seems, that's a big factor. And I understand Najee Harris is a versatile back. I understand like Maurice Jones-Drew and I get in a lot of fights because MJD's like, he's the next Lev Bell. I'm like, okay, but Lev Bell even had his limitations. And Lev Bell, with that shift behind the line of scrimmage, he needed that O-line to help him out. So you saw what happened when he didn't have an expert O-line kind of helping him at the Jets. It wasn't so great. So I like Najee Harris, but that defense is not as good as it was last season. Ben Roethlisberger, we saw a lot of quick passes. Are we going to go back to seeing like the big arm from Ben or not? And then, by the way, without a strong O-line, it just becomes a lot harder just in general. And that division is really hard, just period, point blank, full stop.
Great.
It is.
Thank you.
It is incredibly difficult. I told people that the state of Pennsylvania lost in terms of how draft night went
Oh.
for the state of Pennsylvania. I don't draft running backs in the first round. I put that out there to everybody. There's a reason why I'm not the general manager for the Steelers, but yet Najee Harris, he can't run anywhere if there's no one to block for him. They lost 3 of their best offensive linemen, and they didn't really address it that significantly in the draft. So I like your Steelers bid on that one. It's gonna be very difficult for them to get back and put themselves in a position to be competitive in that North Division.
There are only a few quarterbacks who make their O-line significantly better. And I can only truly right now in the league, I can only think of 2-ish, 3. And the third one might be, so obviously Aaron Rodgers does that. He makes his O-line better for sure. And then Patrick Mahomes makes his O-line better too, until point. I think until 4 of them are missing, right? And then Josh Allen does it pretty well. But Josh Allen, I think Brian Daboll has a lot more to do with that. The architecture of that offense is really the thing that makes, I like the Bills. I think the Bills are going to win their division. But, I think Brian Daboll doesn't get enough credit for making an O-line that's a 7 into a 9. They're a good O-line, but he makes them great. And Josh Allen does help with that.
Yeah, I think you and I have talked about this before. The best thing that happened to the Buffalo Bills was them to continue to go into the playoffs, and the other teams needing to hire a head coach, which meant Brian Daboll was not going to be eligible to go anywhere. That was the best thing that could have happened to this Bills team, especially Josh Allen. All right, before we get you out of here, again, we're talking to Cynthia Freeland from NFL Network, data analytics expert. It's the thing that everybody's been talking about since about noon on Thursday of draft day, right? The Aaron Rodgers scenario. We have not heard from Aaron Rodgers. We've heard from his surrogates, supposedly. We've heard from distractors. We've heard from the Packers, which leads me to believe that they've been communicated with, he's not happy. We're going to make this work. But we haven't heard anything from him. He won't return any of my texts. I bugged him enough, so clearly I'm not getting the insight. Is he, you put it through your model, whatever you did in terms of data, is he a Green Bay Packer next year? Or is this just, I still say it's 50-50 because we don't know enough. So I sit on that fence. I'm not ready to jump on one way or the other, but what fence are you sitting on?
Again, this isn't from insider information. This is just from the fact that I believe him when he says that he's unhappy. I don't think this doesn't feel like he's gonna just break. It didn't feel like Zeke did a few years ago where you're yeah, they'll figure it out. It doesn't feel like that at all. Unless we see Brian Gutekunst get fired, I don't think Aaron Rodgers is coming back. I know that money equals respect in this regard. And I think he wants to be the highest paid. I think he was a little frustrated. It seems like he was a little frustrated that Dak has a higher salary than him. It's one thing for Patrick Mahomes to sign the deal he did because Patrick Mahomes is the future of the league. And I think Aaron Rodgers acknowledges that. And plus that was a very team-friendly deal, very backloaded with guaranteed money. But Aaron Rodgers is nearing the end of his guaranteed money. And he's the MVP. And he's saying, you're not giving me the intangible things that I want. I want X, Y, and Z. And I want the money to be a sign of respect. And it didn't seem, sure, they offered something big, but they could have done that in the middle of last season before Dak Prescott signed a monster contract, which we all knew was coming. And it would have been more respectful. I just think it's more about the fact that he's not going to repeat as the MVP. It just doesn't. It's happened 5 times ever. And the league's so different. It's not going to happen. So he's betting on himself and he's saying, I've got other options. It's not about the money. It's about the respect. And it feels like unless Gutekunst is going to back down and, give him whatever he needs and the power and control, then, it just seems like they're not stupid enough. You know how smart his representation is. You know that they wouldn't be stupid enough to say all this stuff without a term sheet happening with someone else. That's just not, he has great reps. We all know.
He's got our agent. So yes, he's got a great rep. Yeah.
And there's 2 transactions that have to happen. The first is the trade, and then the second is the deal. And I would argue there's probably multiple deals on the table because everybody knows life is about leverage. If you have multiple options, then you get what you want more often. It's leverage. But the trade has to happen first. And the only leverage Aaron has there is to not play. Now, do you want to be the GM that made Aaron Rodgers sit? Because that's what Brian Gutekunst is contending with. Because I think he will sit. I don't think he's going to be it's cool. We're all good. Something's got to happen.
I just think with a name like that, you can't go down in history in the positive column. I just don't think so. I just think that name is when he was born, it was just meant to go down in history as something not great. So I'm sorry to hear that. I love talking to you. It's always good to see you.
Yeah.
We appreciate you taking time on a Monday and celebrating here on the RDL show. Thanks, Cynthia Freeland.
For having me. See you soon.
Okay, bye. All right, Cynthia Freeland from the NFL Network, data analytics expert, joining us. She is the best. We do share an agent, Dave Dunn, from Athletes First, killing it for her, for me, and for Aaron Rodgers. Apparently, he does okay. He probably drinks Athletic Brew. That's why he does okay. Brew without compromise, everybody. A non-alcoholic brew that you can order at athleticbrewing.com and get 10% off your first order of 2 6-packs. Athleticbrewing.com, non-alcoholic beers with none of the consequences. No alcohol, same great taste. Try it now. I was going to pop this one, but it's my last one. So, Charlie isn't here. Charlie is our marketing guy, and he needs to shoot off an email and says, Big fella in California needs his Athletic Brew. You need to send him some more. I don't want to pop that one quite ready today. I'm going to a Dodgers game tonight with the old man who's in town. So excited for that. What do you guys think about what Cynthia had to say? Why? I mean, I love her Steelers. I think the Steelers are going to have a really hard time making the playoffs. I think the Rams are going to be pretty darn good. I think the Seahawks with Russ, you give Russ Wilson, he's going to be pretty darn good. That was an interesting take. Now, of course, she backs it up in terms of, if Aaron Rodgers isn't present. But what was your guys' take on Cynthia's thought process there and what the win probability for these teams will be?
I love how one guy makes the difference for the entire league in this scenario. I love it.
Right.
I think that's fascinating. And she has all these analytics and models, and one guy can screw up all of it. Unbelievable. And I think it's fascinating. The way that she presents it is just amazing. I don't think there's anybody better out there to present the data, to present the whys, right? Because I think, Scott, you brought up a really just like a perfect question, right? Like, why are these teams that have seemingly gotten better, minus the Steelers, and maybe the Seahawks because they didn't draft so great, like, why are these teams that have made the playoffs last year, why are they being left off when there have been moves that have made to potentially improve them? And the way that she came back and explained the variables going into the analytics was really helpful. And you really can't argue with any of it. You just can't. Because it is so well thought out. Every like possible outcome is drawn into this conclusion that, like, I just appreciate the work that she does to get here and to give us a perception of what to look for as we get into the season.
Yeah, I totally agree. And like I said earlier, the three of the teams that we talked about, the Rams, Seahawks, and Steelers, were in the playoffs last year. So the Patriots are really the only big question mark. We know about that post Brady. We'll figure it out. Steelers make sense, but the NFC West is wide open. I think the Cardinals are the team kind of, fourth in line looking up. But if the Niners are healthy and Trey Lance pans out or Jimmy takes them, whatever, the Rams getting better. And the Seahawks, the Seahawks didn't draft very great, but they only had 3 draft picks. That's it. And they're only going to have a couple the next couple of years as well. So I think any of those 3 teams can win the division. Any of them could miss the playoffs. And as we know, if any major injury happens, the Cardinals could be right there to leapfrog.
Yeah, what does Kyler have to do? What does Kyler have to do to make the card? Because that team honestly could be competitive.
He needs to make that. He needs to make that defense much better.
I've watched this offense. You've watched this offense. We know this offense being out west. It's just not going to be physical enough.
Yeah.
It's never going to be physical enough when they need it to be.
Those defenses are nasty.
But the front seven is one of the most on paper is one of the most dominant front sevens now in the league. No,
I'm talking about the offense. The offense will just never be physical enough. They'll never be physical enough to get it done.
You think the offense is the Achilles heel of this team?
Ultimately, it's always the Achilles heel for air raid teams. I mean, defenses are never the strong suit, but it always comes down to the offense not being able to execute and be physical enough. If you go back and look at all the great air raid teams under Mike Leach and Cliff Kingsbury and during this whole time, it always came down to a game where they couldn't be physical enough. They could be a team that could get into a wild card, something like that, but they're just, I hate to say it because it sits so profoundly at the college level, but once you brought that to the NFL, no matter how hybrid you get it, no matter how many people you bring in to run the offense in terms of offensive line play and stuff like that, when you spend the majority of the game or of your life going backwards in terms of pass setting for these offensive linemen, when you ask them to be physical on 3rd down and 1 or 4th down and 1, we saw it a ton last year with that Arizona Cardinals team in the middle of the season, about 3/4 of the way through the season, when they needed big plays. If you go back and look at the Miami game in particular, how they defaulted on those things, and it's the one consistency I can pull from all the years of watching Mike Leach, of watching the air raid or versions of the air raid. You watched USC go through it. This is the first time it's had an adaptation in the NFL, but in a division that's got to be really physical, they better hope this defense and the toughness of J.J. Watt and the rest of everybody there, and how they've designed on how they can use Isaiah Simmons. That's huge for me. Very, very, very interesting stuff. The offense, what those all linemen need to do, probably need to pour a bunch of Bomb Banana hot sauce on their foods in the morning. Maybe that'll get them a little more physical, huh? Bomb Banana, everybody, a new hot sauce developed in the dorm room of Charlie Moss's brother. How's that for it? But they were Michigan men, so take it as you will there. Just kidding, everybody. This is good stuff. They sent a bunch of our way. The white bottle, of course, the less spicy. The red has what they call muy muy, a little more spice to it. Both very good. Go to seekthespice.com. That's seekthespice.com, all one word. And today you can receive 10% off your first order by using the promo code LEAF. That's LEAF, like on a tree, at checkout. Bomb Banana is banana-based, not banana-flavored. Don't get that confused. It's not just tasting banana. In fact, you really can't even tell it's bananas from the spice. It's banana-based. Check it out now. SeekTheSpice.com, promo code LEAF. All right, guys, that was a heck of a show. We didn't really have a question of the day. I think the NBA talk, and we had a bunch of activity from people. People interested in Jonathan and maybe having a security blanket next time. I
feel like I need to show up with some boxing gloves. I was getting this. Some of these viewers were coming at me, man. They were coming at me.
Well, I think if it was called the Jonathan Rifkin Show, I probably would be getting a little pummeled myself, right? So I understand it. I mean, it's different, when you're in the big chair, you tend to collect some assets as you roll through life, and VCJ 27. I don't know who you are, brother, but you're on my team apparently. All right. The rest of the week, of course, on Wednesday we will cover the first play-in games, what those look like, and how incredibly interesting they were to the fan bases that were watching NBA basketball this year. Rob Berger, our friend of the show, man, we really appreciate you. We really appreciate everybody who came and viewed today. I think we might run it through Twitter a little more often. I think just the viewership, we interact with a lot more people. Go ahead and subscribe to the Ryan D. Leaf Show at our YouTube channel. And if you want to listen through audio, you go to via podcast on the Believe Podcast Network. Follow us at RDL Show, at the RDL Show on Twitter and Instagram. We'll see you on Wednesday. Everybody have a great couple days.